Welcome to the Samueletini Show, where business, innovation, and sustainability converge to drive progress. Are you ready to uncover solutions shaping our future? Let's dive in. Welcome to a new episode. And today we are going to discuss something that is dearest to my heart, conservation and how it works in the African context. And we do it with the head of research of the Oppenheimer Generation, Duncan MacFadyen. Duncan, it's a pleasure to having you today.
Thank you, Samuel. Great to be on your show.
Duncan, before we go into the discussion, can you briefly tell us your journey, how you have entered this space?
Absolutely, Samuel. In fact, my father worked for Natal Parks Board in South Africa, so I grew up in a lot of the conservation areas in St. Lucia, Sedwana, and I've been very fortunate in that I've always known what I've wanted to do, and I've always wanted to go into conservation. I've always wanted to be a scientist and really travel on the sustainability journey, which I've traveled on. And this took me to study, and I went a bit of a roundabout way. I first studied nature conservation, a diploma in nature conservation, then did a BTech and a master's in technology and conservation. And then I thought, no, I actually wanted to go more the science route. So then I studied a master's in science at the University of Pretoria, and then ultimately a PhD in small mammal ecology in the Bunkenveld grasslands. I initially worked in the Kruger Park for a year, Kruger National Park, and then moved to another park called Mapungubwe National Park up on the northern border of South Africa. And it was there that I met Strilly and Nikki Oppenheimer, owning a major shareholder in De Beers Consolidated Mine, the Venetia Limpopo Nature Reserve, next to the Mapungubwe National Park. And I met them there. After that, I went to the Ditsong Museum, or then the Transvaal Museum, as head of mammalogy. And then they created this position for me. And for the past 25 years, I've worked for Oppenheimer family. And for the last 4 years, they've actually enabled me to develop a small business within the Oppenheimer Generations community called Oppenheimer Generations Research and Conservation.
Fantastic. And it's really also important, see the role of philanthropy and the role of work and investment that is critical still for conservation. But for the people that maybe they are not familiar with the context of South Africa, can you explain, briefly, what is Oppenheimer Generation, what the head of research imply, and also what is the role, within the Oppenheimer group, the specific role of conservation?
The Oppenheimer family are obviously quite a wealthy family. They were the major shareholder in De Beers. The diamond is forever, so a diamond company. But they've got a long history and a deep-seated passion for conservation and biodiversity. And even though they were in mining, they've owned properties. And I was brought on initially to look at the properties and ensure that they're running sustainably. They've got Swalu Kalahari Reserve in the Kalahari, 118,000 hectares, which is obviously quite a sensitive environment. They've got the Telperian Nature Reserve, their Bronkhorstspruit Witbank, beautiful grassland, Bunkenveld Grassland Reserve, a Wakefield, Ngeni Poort in the Drakensberg, and then a ranch which has been in the family for over 100 years, Shingani Holistic in Zimbabwe. So over and above the properties and conservation being a very strong passion for the family, it created a great opportunity within the Oppenheimer Generations community, which is the company which supports Nikki, Jonathan, Australian, and Carrie Oppenheimer and their children. The division that I run is OpGen Research and Conservation, which focuses on all the conservation research science components of the family businesses. We've developed on the property cutting edge game count technology, where Nikki and Jonathan Oppenheimer fly the helicopters themselves, where we count game in order to manage populations, see how populations are doing. We brought out and supported a large number of books, a book on the game counts process, a book on Swalu, a book on Shingani, and recently a book on the art of the aircraft. that the Oppenheimers own. We've also developed, and the Oppenheimers have given me a budget, which obviously not only to fund research on the properties, but look at big picture research across the African continent and beyond. So we've developed big programs with the leaders in certain fields. Future Ecosystems for Africa with Sally Archibald, looking at identifying tipping points and then mitigating those tipping points, looking at Rewild Capital, which is looking at working with carbon credits with communities and rewilding community land, then brokering carbon credits and plowing that back into enriching the lives of communities. Oppenheimer program in African landscape systems, looking at development of the next generation of stars in Africa, emerging young African scientists with great potential. African wildlife economies, looking at inclusive wildlife economies that are really going to change, the face of Africa. And we really believe that, conservation, and I'm a purist when it comes to conservation and stability, but it has to pay for itself because it'll come to the point where there's people or conservation, and you can never have that. It has to be people and conservation, and you need to look at sustainability and how. And I think one thing COVID did teach us is that we can't just rely on tourism. Tourism is important, but you've got to look at different sustainability components and see if that you're maximizing them. Again, Oppenheimer family have been brilliant. They've given us a wonderful opportunity to put these big programs in not only the climate change space, the biodiversity space, and urbanization, guiding where development across the African continent is going to go. The big African cities, they say, are still coming. And how do we guide them in a way that we're thoughtful, that they take conservation into consideration, take the green technologies that are out there? And of course, I alone cannot do this. So I head up research and conservation, but I've got a wonderful team of people working with me. Rindani Nguda, who's very much comes from the ecological, social component. I've got a wetland ecologist, Rukumla Dlamini, and they help with these big picture projects, but also look at projects on the ground. Each of these properties we develop research centers. So each property has a conservationist on them and a research specialist. And we actually are building not only these big programs across Africa, but also from the inside on our research centers, facilitating research that's not only going to assist us to better manage the species and ecosystems on those properties, but also models that can be developed on the property kind of for Africa.
And fantastic. And you really struck me with some discussion. Sometimes you're doing an awful lot of job, I must say also, because that is important. The question is, of course, you said it correct. Sometimes, especially in the debate, even in social media, there is conservation or people. So we need to pave way to development. We need to pave way to road. We need to pave way to construction. So but Africa, it has still the highest biodiversity in the whole world. So it has also been granted as a gift. Also, we have the most arable land, we have the best forest, we have the iconic animals, but of course it's growing. Africa population is growing, and there is a need also to see how we can put together these two parts, the heritage, the world, what is the wildlife, what is maybe the Australian we say the outdoor, with also the development and how we can develop properly, not following the mistakes that were done maybe in Europe, in the US, or even in Asia, polluting and destroying. So how do you see those two poles that are sometimes conflicting?
Samuel, it's a very good question. And I think in certain areas, they will always conflict to a certain degree. But I'm not anti-development. I'm not anti-industrialization. It is part of where we're going. And Africa, as you say, will be developing even further. So it's critical to put science behind decisions. And make sure a solid science behind decisions. And we see ourselves very much as Oppenheimer Generations, research and conservation, as bridging that gap in terms of, business. We need business. Without business, economies don't grow and develop. We need conservation. We need wild spaces. Africa has the greatest potential in some cases. Countries like Kenya, Tanzania, South Africa have maximized the tourism potential to a large extent. I think there's always extra work that could be done. But elsewhere in Africa, there are beautiful areas. I've been to Gabon, I've been to Congo. It's mouth-watering, the diversity that they have there, but they don't not really tapped into it for various reasons. So we should not be holding business back. We should be working with business, with industry, and ensuring that sensitive areas are not disturbed, that, protected areas. And you mentioned peace parks and other African parks do very, very good work in identifying where are these key areas that are precious as a personal, heritage for that country, for the people of that country, but that we can't have destroyed. But there are other areas where you can, and the Oppenheimers often talk about light touch. There's areas where we can have industry. There are areas where we need to be sensitive and only touch these areas gently with our fingertips and not, create huge disturbance. But creating that balance is not easy. And creating, ensuring that we look at all aspects from a sustainability perspective. How is it impacting communities? How is it impacting environment? But of course, what is often forgotten is the economics, the financial contributions. You need those three to be taken into consideration at all times.
And it's really true because we sometimes I advocate also, yeah, we need to win conservation from the perspective that is just, charitable work. We need to support and get donation because philanthropy can be an enabler, maybe a catalyst for change, but of course it needs to be sustainable. I want to ask a subsequent question on that about the role of communities. There is a lot of discussions, especially also here in Kenya and others. Sometimes conservation is labeled like, oh, the approach is putting fences. And also governments, they have fence area which cuts critical corridors. So you see also dwindling, maybe population. So, or or at worst, they say conservation is for the rich people. So that for just for the tourists, the sake of the people is not working for the community. And sometimes I have seen unfortunate times where maybe local leader or other with bad intention just fuel communities to work against the conservation. How we can put, instead of creating again these two fires, again, how we can triple down to the people on the ground, which of course they need to see the benefits of the conservation work.
Jane, really good question, Samuel. I mean, and it's involvement of communities, ensuring communities from the beginning are involved in the decision-making process and enable them to be a part, of the discussions. It's futures thinking. It's thinking not only, how we in urban environments often think what we want to see in the long term. It's involving them in that futures thinking. Those people, who are living on the land, how do they see their environment coming in? Too often people coming from outside and tell people living there how they should be living and how, what their future looks like. So they need to be a part of that futures thinking. And I think from a science perspective, involve researchers and communities together in decision. So often someone from Germany will come. They'll come and the communities have a great indigenous knowledge and, and knowledge of that environment. And often they're collecting the data and they're putting out camera traps. And somebody from overseas will come and almost exploit those communities, and come and take their knowledge and not acknowledge them, not involve them in the process other than, using their expertise. And it's happened in Namibia, a big program we're supporting in people and wildlife. And actually, we're involving communities as para-ecologists. So they're actually getting recognized in papers, they're getting funded, to collect data, and it's actually creating job opportunities. But often with these big parks, taking a step back, and I think Kenya and Tanzania in many ways have got it right, where actually, people use national parks. In South Africa, have a history of fortress conservation where we put up big fences. And certainly in the old days, the bad old days here in South Africa, it was largely for white people that would use these areas. And then you've got communities, often impoverished communities, living on these boundaries. And obviously, and seeing Mercedes Benzes and whatever going in, I like to say that that has changed somewhat. And actually, with democracy, I mean, everybody utilizes these parks. But I think Sandparks is taking it even further with this, 20 by 30, and they're calling it Vision 2040, looking at blurring the boundaries, actually, where people can generate more benefit, of those communities. And I won't go into, culling, etc., but I've always thought it strange where in certain places, we've got an overpopulation of elephant, but then we're spending millions of rand contracepting those elephants when actually you've got communities that are protein deficient on the boundaries of these parks. I'm not saying give handouts, but is there not a process where one could look at sustainably harvesting certain species and selling it, maybe 1 rand a kilogram, where actually people can see the benefit and poor people can see the benefit on the ground. So I think we've come a long way. I think we've got a long way still to go. But for conservation areas and parks, national parks, to survive, I think going forward, we need to really ensure that communities surrounding those parks and the broad and everybody in that society needs to see the value of, otherwise we're going to lose these natural areas.
Definitely. And I think it's really important. And it's also important, I think, the narrative that sometimes is pushed from, let's say, North America or Europe, pitching communities against people and others is doing more harm than good. So I think African born sons with people that they are on the ground like you, born here for many generations, like here this side, we can work on how we can decide how to conserve and work better with the support, of course, of everybody. It's a common effort. It's not and is an heritage for the entire planet. And going into the project, you mentioned some. You mentioned the Namibia. You mentioned the urban areas and others. If you can pick maybe 2 or 3 projects that really, let's say, they keep you awake at night and say, okay, this is where my passion. Of course, I know you have many, but just 2 or 3 to for our listeners.
Absolutely. I mean, one in Malawi, I mean, it's a huge diversity of cichlid fish. And I don't know if you're aware of cichlid fish, beautifully colored. I mean, they almost look like sea fish. I think they've got a history, a long origin of being, saltwater, and then, the lake cut off and they've adapted, but high endemism. And of course, Malawi being a country with a small country with a large population and a largely poor population, and that lake being hugely important as a source of protein. But of course, and again, you mentioned it, often people from outside coming in, bringing one solution, and malaria, of course, bringing mosquito nets. But of course, those mosquito nets then being utilized for fishing.
I've
And
seen.
and if you're keeping a mosquito out, imagine what size fish you're catching. And if exactly. So we've got a wonderful project with Ripple Africa looking at working with communities. So it's not coming in and showing them, and working with them that not to use mosquito nets, but bringing in bigger nets with bigger sized netting and showing that actually over time it's working for them. And there's certain areas in the lake that they've been, working for 10, 15 years, and where the benefits have been shown, where they are putting less effort in catching bigger fish, fewer fish, and being able to feed their families better, rather than using mosquito nets and catching all those youngsters that aren't given a chance to grow. So it's a wonderful sustainability project that is really, and I've always putting science behind, projects like this, where you can actually show that, this is the situation when you started. This is the intervention that you're having, and this is how you're monitoring it and measuring it. Another big program that we're running is called the Jennifer Ward Oppenheimer Research Grant, and it's now in its seventh year. And what we're looking for with this grant is looking for young African scientists. So, often you go to these conferences and you see, it's all old white males. So, and again, we've got a lot to learn from the global north, and obviously they've got a lot to learn from us. And we obviously we bring both sides together at these conferences. But this award, looking for young emerging African scientists from across the continent. So we put out a call every year. That's 150,000 US dollars per year to a different project. And we've had wonderful programs supported, firstly, looking at biodiversity and intactness in Africa. So looking at the continent. Of course, these have all got to be big programs, multi countries, and really identifying a big problem and then putting African solutions to these problems. So Haley Clements, looking at biodiversity and intactness, worked with over 200 experts from across the continent, and then creating maps of where biodiversity is still intact for the whole continent. Then a second winner, Bernard Kutsia, looking at vectors and artificial light, and artificial light's impact on biodiversity, number one, but also do certain types of artificial light attract certain. So if you put this light in, are you at a greater risk of catching malaria, for example, again across multiple countries? Then Gideon Adawu from Nigeria, looking at microplastics in fresh water and marine environments, and how that impacts human health. We've also Elisa LaRue, and looking at cattle. In Africa, we're always going to have cattle. Cattle are part of our almost heritage, should we say, and cattle corridors. Are cattle creating corridors of genetic biodiversity and actually assisting in the conservation and increasing biodiversity? I'm looking in Zimbabwe, looking in Botswana, some really, really exciting work there. And then to Madagascar was our next winner, looking at mosses and bryophytes as measurements of air pollution. Of course, and I don't know if you've been to Madagascar, Antananarivo is unbelievably densely populated and has, huge pollution issues. And of course, Madagascar being very, very important from a genetic diversity perspective, and rich endemism. Species. I think 70% of the species you get there, you get nowhere else in the world. And huge issues with pollution, huge issues with soil erosion and loss of soil. And then the last person, last year's winner, Sharon Conradi, looking at models of climate change and adaptation of species across the continent, and where will species be able to hold on to these increasing temperatures, and where will areas be specifically affected by climate change, and what species would we lose there, what can we do to protect them. So big projects, really exciting. And then last one, and I can go on for days on the different programs. That the other is African Wildlife Economy Institute. And what I'm very excited about there is looking at development of sustainable businesses across the African continent. And Haley Clements, who was actually a previous JWO winner, is working with Awi, and she's looking at measuring what opportunities and what not only from a carbon perspective, but looking at biodiversity credit perspective, looking at the game meat market. It's unbelievable. And you in Kenya, us in South Africa, maybe it's different. I don't know if it's different there, but if you go to supermarkets here in South Africa, all you can get is feedlot beef often, battery chickens pumped with hormones and
Mm.
antibiotics to keep them alive, pork houses, and it's not that healthy.
Yeah.
What are you ingesting? But we've got vast wildlife resources here. I mean, and I'm not saying farm, kudu or impala or whatever in feedlots, but if these vast conservation areas have outlets and there's a supply chain that is, the farmer, because often you've got game farmers and they don't know what to do. I mean, there's some biltong hunters that come and do it for the biltong, but there's not getting into these chains. So if you can create that value chain where the man on the street, not only will the person be, the consumer be healthier, but we might have more conservation areas
Mm.
because that will replace monocultures of millies or replace, feedlot cattle.
Mm.
And not only will we be more healthy, but we'll have more conservation areas. Of course, you need the habitat to. I'm not saying farm. I'm saying have vast areas where you can sustainably take animals off, but insects, plants. You'll create habitats for all these others, and you'll increase biodiversity considerably. So I think other than just tourism, and tourism is an important player. Swalu, our property in the Kalahari, is high-end tourism.
Mm.
So you've got a lot of tourists from international tourists, but interesting in COVID, the South African and African market was quite kind of saved the bacon in many ways,
Mm.
without not being able to travel internationally for that. And then other properties, we've got more a lot of local tourists coming. So tourism is always going to be a player, but other value items, to conservation, we've got to explore these. And I think and involve communities in these programs where there's value add to them.
Mm. No, I think, I mean, your suggestion, I know it's controversial for some people, but it's something that also this kind, you see, in the old days until 77, if I'm not wrong, in Kenya, then game meat was banned. But that was the way also community lived. And when I speak with the elders, they say, we went, we go, we harvested, and then we collected, we had, we got some zebra. And it was balanced. Of course, if you put some people horrified, especially I talk, putting money value on animals. But of course, for some communities, it is important. And again, I think is a good food for thought because you can, as you said, it would be a huge expansion of habitats if you can harvest and work sustainably with animals and others. By the time I know here, I can tell you, I mean, I will not tell big, but I know in many of the outlets in the country, you find poached game meat from national parks, conservancies, and reserves, which is dangerous because people go at night putting snares. It's illegal, so you get arrested. And then it's not very safe because, of course, you kill in the night, you go in the night moving, maybe the meat is already is already cooked. So how you can solve this problem? This is livelihood problem in a different way. And I think is also thinking outside the box, notwithstanding our differences in our perspective, it should not be ruled out as stamped as horrified. And actually, it can be one part of the solution. And there is a huge demand. I mean, we know people, I speak with communities, and it's something that is there. Game meat, bush meat. We know in Democratic of Congo, here in Kenya, and others, or even in South Africa, I'm sure, which you have legal sometimes, bushmeat rather than. So it's a big business. So we need to understand and tap it and emerge it in a different way. And on that, since you said, sorry, I don't know if you want to comment on that as well, but if you want to add as well the role of technology, as I say, going outside the box, no thinking tourism, the tourists come from abroad, take the picture and go. Cannot be like that. We need different and you said business and also our technology. can step in into it to improve. But if you want also to comment on the bushmeat, I mean,
Yeah, I just wanted to say that, bushmeat is a problem. Poaching is a problem
yeah,
in South Africa. I'm sure in Kenya. I think we're going to look at legalized ways of providing channeling meat, to people, in a sustainable way. And I mean, I won't go into the hunting because I know, there's a lot of emotion around hunting, but it's been proven that hunting can actually not only contribute to conservation, but also really contribute to communities' livelihood and through the added benefits of, having a lodge, having people having to skin, having cooks, having service, and I know there's a lot of places that, certainly for high-end tourism, where they won't obviously shoot animals on the property. So they buy game meat from another butcher so they can tell the people that are coming that, no animals are hunted on this property. But maybe it's the story that one should be telling, because what is better, having going out sustainably, professionally, taking, we've got overpopulation of a certain species of animal,
mm,
taking a couple of animals off where they are in their home on the property, and then, doing it professionally, taking the animal, utilizing that animal, giving it to the guest, or is it better where a lot of properties do, where they tell guests they're not hunting or not shooting animals for the pot. They buy it off the,
mm,
somewhere else, and then to come and then they've got to catch animals because you can't. The moment you put a fence around property, you've got to manage it.
yeah,
Otherwise, you find one species outcompetes the other species, and you get total destruction of that biodiversity and that habitat. So, what's better, bringing in a helicopter, bringing in trucks, chasing animals around the property? Then you chase them into a funnel, you put them on a truck, you take them somewhere else, drop them. Then they get bought by somebody else. Then they, 9 times out of 10, get taken to another place, dropped there, and often then shot.
yeah. Or
Because
worse, they just open the fences and then they let the animal go roaming around and they get poached or others. Eh,
absolutely, and
Especially, I was talking with some conservancies, zebras and others, the growing number and overgrazing is really an issue for other species. So,
you're quite right.
no,
So I mean, it's all these wicked problems that we've got to deal with, and pressure that, ultimately what's best for the animal. And Oppenheimer's have got a very good saying, and I use it quite a bit, and that is, it's the quality of life of the animal and the quality of the death of the animal. So you've got to take that all into consideration, and they largely use that in terms of livestock. So they don't want a cow to eat a cow that has had a horrible life, living in a feedlot where it's like this, it's pumped with hormones and it can't move and it's standing in feces its whole life and it's had a horrible life, and then it gets put on a truck and it's taken to an abattoir and it has a horrible death. You don't want that. And that can apply to wild animals too.
yeah, definitely. That's why, I mean, Romana, we have still have the fortune to have cattle that graze and move. And so that is something that maybe in other part of the world they don't have. I want just to go back to the technology. How
Yeah.
you are leveraging technology? We live in the age of AI and others into how you put that in conservation.
I mean, I think technology is brilliant. And I think the advances in technology have opened up a whole new world. I would caution that we must be careful that technology doesn't replace the person, the human scientist, the human manager on the ground. There's certain things that technology can't do that only analytical person can take on. So it's very important that it doesn't replace people, but it's used with people, and we take the best of what people can offer, the human on the ground, and what technology can offer. I mean, it's unbelievable what the opportunities that exist. And as I mentioned earlier, we fly game counts on all our properties. Mr. and Jonathan and Mr. Nicky Oppenheimer are pilots, and we fly and we use our teams. But it's, and again, with aerial game counts, you're looking for a trend. One thing you know for sure, and that is that you're wrong in what your final numbers of species, but you're looking at trends with previous years and looking at, it'll go up and down, but if it's like way down, there's a red flag, or way up, there's a red flag. But with AI and drones, there's specialized technology with infrared where it takes out the human error, and you can get a lot more accurate counts. It can identify under trees. So there's definitely opportunities with technology there. We've got a big program in Madagascar, and looking at, with Durrell Wildlife Conservation Trust, looking at rewilding habitats, but also some critically endangered species like the Madagascar pochard, the plowshare tortoise, the rare large-headed turtle. Looking at those species that are extinct already, almost extinct in the wild, and then bringing them back through captive breeding. But there's a species called a bamboo lemur, which nobody could you know, get accurate counts on, because they're living in habitats that are inaccessible, in reed beds and bamboo reed beds. But with drones and this infrared technology, they're sending drones in and getting accurate counts and not flying too close to them to disturb them. But you must see the footage of them. It's unbelievable. With infrared, you see them all, and you can count them. So get a good, census data. They're also looking at drones planting mangrove trees in inaccessible areas, in Madagascar. So I think AI drone technology is taking us to a new level. There's a program called Earth Ranger, which the Jody Allen Foundation has developed, and a lot of conservation areas are now using this technology, and it's brilliant in that you've got a central area, viewing area, where security officers or conservation officers can sit, and a digital map of the whole property. And with collared individuals, you can see elephant movements. You can have, where your rangers are moving, hotspots, areas for poaching. You could, put technology in. So it's unbelievable. So Earth Range has been a game changer for us, certainly at Swallow and at Shingani. And then app development. We've developed quite a number of apps. One is within the Uhuru program, looking at, for communities. You know, everyone has a smartphone these days, wherever you are, and so you now can download this Uhuru disease app, and if you're a small scale community member, your cow has got, various symptoms. You can go onto this app, and it will tell you what it could possibly be, and connect you to a local vet that can give you advice. So, I mean, as I said, I think technology is great. I think they're wonderful advances. And I think working with scientists and using technology, we can do amazing things.
That is fantastic, and thank you for this wonderful example. I really like the one of the cattle. This is usually the big issue because so our extension and the officer also of the Ministry of Agriculture or Livestock, they have maybe huge swath of land and maybe one or two vets. So if you have people that are trained and you have technology to do that, that will be a fantastic one. And really, it's interesting how the AI and how you can count properly, and the mangrove. That is something that is often overlooked because, as I do, we plant mangroves and work, and sometimes an inaccessible area, drone can be a good ally. And Duncan, it's been a wonderful pleasure to having you and discuss. as a final thought, which message do you want to have to our listeners that are spread all over the world and maybe think about conservation?
Samuel, I thought about that long and hard. And I mean, I think big. Think big in the conservation and use one's time wisely. And back and work on projects that are going to create impact. I see a lot of programs, a lot of good money, and a lot of time wasted on projects that aren't going to move the dial. We need big, bold, ambitious projects that are going to really change things, make positive change. Are we remiss in saying choose the right partners? I mean, and that's a challenge because there are a lot of people out there that that will take you down a rabbit hole and actually will waste your time. You'll spend a lot of money, and actually, you won't come out with the results that you're actually looking for. So choose the right partners. And then in this space, it's an exciting area. And I think anything is possible. And so think big, work with great people, and most importantly, work with nice people. Work with nice people that you want to see and that you're excited to work with.
And that is how we sometimes you bump into people that are more bolder on your way than difficulty. So thank you so much, Duncan. It's been a great pleasure having you, and thank you for sharing your wisdom. And it's wonderful also food for thoughts that I'm sure will spark debates. Thank you so much, Duncan.
Thank you, Samuel. Great pleasure chatting to you.
Are you satisfied after this wonderful episode? Let's continue together our sustainability journey.